Just want to take a quick second here to give some brief analysis of the recent news out of the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops, as they just elected their president and vice president. Now, if you didn't know this was actually taking place today, well, you're not alone. The body itself is largely a bureaucracy of company men who refuse to actually speak the hard truths about what's going on in the church today. And in fact, if you don't know who the current president of the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops is at the moment, well, again, you're not alone. Nobody does, because it's really not a significant role, at least in terms of the public eye. Yes, the individual who occupies the position has a certain amount of influence over how the church is perceived in the U.S., but by and large, these are thankless roles that really, in the large scheme of things, get lost in the midst of everything, and you really pay more attention usually to the more public figures such as Bishop Barron, Cardinal Dolan, etc. In any case, it's still worthwhile, I think, to analyze the situation that is unfolding there. Now, what's most notable at what happened today at the conference itself, where they were meeting to elect the president and vice president, is that the Supich candidate, at least the hardline liberal candidate, that's Weisenberger of Detroit, lost abysmally. In fact, he only received 14 votes on the first ballot. Of course, many others on the first ballot who are up for election failed miserably as well. You had Bishop Robert Barron, who only received 26 votes. Bishop Rhodes of Fort Wayne, Indiana, who's somewhat conservative, who's done some good things in denying pro-abortion Catholic politicians communion, and has said a number of other things, especially when it came to many years ago the Obama controversy at the University of Notre Dame. He only received 18. And our Alexander Bishop Sample out there in Oregon, who at least historically has always been associated with the Latin Mass, he only received 5. The obvious frontrunner going into the election was Archbishop Coakley of Oklahoma City. He strongly performed on the first ballot and throughout. It only took 3 votes to get him to win the position itself. Now, he's a fairly conservative guy. We'll talk about him more in just a moment. And of course, the Bishops' Conference itself has always sort of acted as a more conservative bulwark against what's been going on in the Vatican these past 15 years. If you look at the last several presidents of the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops, they've all, you could say, leaned to the center right, if you will. In fact, if you look at the last several presidents of the USCCB, you won't find too many hardline liberals. In fact, the last one that really was of that orientation was Bishop Gomez, Archbishop Gomez of Los Angeles from 2019 to 2022. But you look at the other names, Cardinal DiNardo of Texas, Archbishop Kurtz was there from 2013 to 2016, Bishop Dolan was there from 2010 to 2013, and Cardinal George of Chicago was in charge from 2007 to 2010. So you can obviously say most of these individuals, at least the way they governed and the way they're perceived, is right of center. What's worth noting here, though, is that Daniel Flores of Texas was the vice president. And Flores is obviously the liberal moderating voice, if you will, who will be the voice of Supich as well as the Vatican in the U.S. hierarchy. Flores speaks multiple languages. He's been active in the USCCB for many years in leadership roles. He's actually the chairman of the Committee on Doctrine since 2020. He's also previously led the Committee on Cultural Diversity. So he's obviously, Hispanic. He's going to be aware of the issue of immigration and push that talking point because Leo is obviously really big on that. But Flores also has been involved, on the Committee for Divine Worship, pro-life activities, as well as ecumenical and religious affairs and religious liberty. He also serves as a member of the Catholic Relief Services Group, which is, again, obviously tied into the entire Open Borders program. Now, what's interesting, though, about Flores is that he actually attended the University of Dallas in Texas, which is a hub of fairly conservative thought. Many individuals who go there are more inclined to the Latin Mass. And he was previously the secretary of Bishop Rene Gracida, who's now over 100, but has said many good things about the situation in the church today, especially the crisis and where he sees things are going. Now, what's interesting is how this actually played out so quickly. On the first ballot, Coakley received 67 votes to Flores' 52. So they were obviously the first, right out the gate, very, very much supported by the majority of the voting members. The second vote saw Coakley rise to 102 and Bishop Flores to 77. That prompted a runoff, which resulted in Coakley winning 128 to 109. Now, what's worrying about Flores is that in 2023, he participated in the Synod on Synodality in Rome. And just this past October of 2024, in fact, he was elected to the Synod's Ordinary Council. So he's a synodal guy, right? And of course, that's what Leo said on the balcony after he was elected. Coakley, on the other hand, again, he'll probably take a more moderate approach. In 2023, the U.S. bishops tapped him as secretary of the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops over instead pro-LGBT Cardinal Tobin of Nighty Night fame, the one over there in New Jersey. And he actually, Coakley, endorsed Archbishop Cordileone's ban on communion for Nancy Pelosi due to her pro-abortion stance. Now, again, in the past, Coakley, if you look him up, he's taken a number of strong statements and taken a number of strong stances, rather, against LGBT ideology. At the same time, though, he did criticize a Supreme Court ruling where he said that the U.S. bishops have long supported the EPA's ability to regulate, quote, greenhouse gases in order to address climate change. So now, the most worrying post that's being occupied right now is by the Bishop of El Paso, and that's by Mark Seitz. Seitz is the chairman of the Bishops' Conference on Migration. Now, really, he uses his role to just simply push open borders and globalist talking points. And in fact, he's had multiple interactions with Leo himself and seems to be acting as his agent here in the U.S. When they were in the Vatican and Leo leaned in and said to him, "You stand with me, I stand with you. The church cannot remain silent on the issue of immigration in the United States." And in fact, that was the third time that Seitz and Leo had actually crossed paths. It was when several years ago that Leo invited Seitz to speak to the bishops across the world who were gathered in Rome when Prevost was in charge of the dicastery of bishops. Prevost invited Seitz to come and speak about the ministry of bishops on immigration. They also met for a papal audience this past September for the Jubilee for Missions and Migrants. Seitz actually told America magazine after their interaction that, quote, the Holy Father did express his concerns for the situation of immigrants in the U.S. He also said, quote, Leo said he would really like the U.S. bishops to speak together on this issue. So that's the situation going forward. The bishops elected the more moderate, center-right president of the Bishops' Conference, but they followed that right up with someone who's going to be pushing synodality and immigration going forward, which ultimately is not very much to look forward to. In any case, that's my analysis of what happened with the U.S. bishops today. Thanks. God bless and take care.